Hey, so this is a little bit about Adam Smith and Benjamin Franklin. These guys are doing sort of an application of utilitarianism, and it's going to show us that utilitarianism does not always tell us to do what you might have intuitively thought. So utilitarianism tells us that you should always do the thing that is going to maximize the sum total of pleasure. And you might think, well, the way to do that is to be really nice to people. But that's not obviously true. And Adam Smith and Benjamin Franklin are going to be trying to show that the best way to actually benefit everybody is to not try to, like at all. Adam Smith is going to argue that if you would just pursue your own profit, as a general rule, you're going to have to benefit other people in the process. If you were trying to benefit other people, you wouldn't benefit them nearly as much as you do if you just kind of, set them aside, treat them with respect, but focus on your own profit. And Benjamin Franklin gives us part of the same idea from a slightly different point of view. So here's the reason for thinking this. It has to do weirdly with money. So remember, one of the big problems with utilitarianism was that it tells us to maximize the sum total of pleasure, but that's not a thing that makes any sense, right? A sum total requires that you have units that you can add together, but there's no such thing as a unit of pleasure. There's no way to measure pleasure. I can say that I like A more than B, and B more than C, and A more than C, but I can't say that I like A more than B more than, the same as, or less than I like B more than C. There's just no numbers to attach to that. I can rank things, but I can't say I get 17 units of pleasure from this, but I only get 11 units of pleasure from that other thing. There's just no units. So maximizing pleasure even for an individual person on her own is impossible, but trying to maximize pleasure between more than one person, I can't tell whether I'm going to maximize pleasure by giving this person the thing he most desires or this person something that she just kind of vaguely wants. Right? There's no way to compare these things. But what if you could find something that you could attach to pleasure, but that you could count? And you could sort of make people take this countable thing and assign all of their pleasures something countable here. So here's a really easy kind of example. I figure that the amount of time that it takes to open and hold doors and stuff like that is pretty much, it's just exactly as frustrating for anybody to have to open a door as for anybody else to hold a door or something like that. We really would just like to minimize the amount of time spent holding and opening doors. So if I've gotten to a door first, and it's going to take me a half a second to hold the door for somebody, and in so doing I spare them 2 seconds of opening a door, then I've saved the universe 1.5 seconds of door opening time, which seems like a small bonus. And that, I would guess, is why it is that we have the custom of holding doors for people, right? Why it is that if someone is far enough behind you that you would have to hold the door for longer than it would take for it to completely shut and then walk up to it, you just let the door close. But if they're closer than that, so that the door would be shutting sort of between when you've left it and when they get there, you just hold the door for people. It saves them time and costs you less time. So we're not exactly saying that you're spending a little bit of pleasure yourself for more pleasure for another person, but we're getting as close to that as you can get by saying we're spending a little bit of time to save someone else a little bit more time. All right, so if you can just peg pleasure to something else that you can count, then you can almost count pleasure. You can pretend like you're counting pleasure. So what if you could... All right. And that seems like, seconds are the same thing in one person and in another person. So it seems like you're not only, you can save yourself time and you can also save somebody else's time. All right. Well, what if you were to make everybody tell you how much they wanted things by giving them some kind of token that they could turn in for things? Right, so someone likes A more than B more than C, and then you're trying to figure out, would they be better off if I gave them A or if I gave them B and C put together? Well, what if they had these, widgets or, tokens or something like that that they gave you in return for those? So they will give you 10 tokens for an A, and they will give you 9 tokens for a B and 3 tokens for a C. Well, now you know that they'd rather have a B and a C together rather than an A. All right, but what I just described is money, right? So Adam Smith and other free market thinkers have argued that money is something that we can use as if it were a way of measuring pleasure or well-being or satisfaction or something like that. I can be asked how much I'm willing to spend on things, and other people spend the exact same things as me. They also spend money. So you can compare my preferences to one another in dollars, and you can compare my preference to somebody else's preferences in dollars, and you can figure out, as well as it's possible to figure out, what people would benefit most from having. So if you can get somebody to give you all of their money honestly, then you must be pleasing them as much as it's possible to please them. Right? So if you would just do a thing that maximizes your profit, you have to be benefiting people. Right? So Adam Smith wants to say, look, I mean, it's all very nice to be nice to people. And of course, sometimes you can tell without spending any money what it is that people need. Right? Obviously, people who are starving need to be fed. Obviously, people who are dying of thirst need water. You don't need to check the finances to find those things out. But once you've gotten past some basic needs, it's just not obvious what will most benefit people, right? So why don't you get them to tell you? And then, you don't want to just listen to the people who are loudest or whiniest or something like that. So get people to have some kind of a neutral token thing that they turn in return for the things that they want. And then they must get the things that they most want, and that's what money is. So Adam Smith figures that the profit motive is spectacularly socially useful. In pursuing my own profit, I thereby indirectly benefit everybody, because the only way that I can profit is by giving people the things that they're willing to give me money for, and that's exactly the things that will bring them those pleasure or happiness or satisfaction or well-being or something. All right, so how is it that I manage to make a profit? In order to make a profit, I have to have some at least slightly new idea. And here's what I need to do. There's already a whole bunch of businesses out there. There's already a whole bunch of people who produce goods and services, and they sell them to people. And if I want to make a profit, I need to produce a good or service and sell it to people, but I can't do exactly what somebody else is doing. I mean, they're already there doing it, right? So if somebody's got a laundromat at a specific spot, I might not have a very interesting idea. I'm just going to make a different laundromat, but it's got to be at least a different place, right? So I've got to notice that there is an unmet interest or desire that people have, and then I produce whatever that is, and if it's a good idea, I will make money off of it, and if it was a bad idea, I will not. So what makes for a good idea? A good idea is one where I either produce more stuff or better stuff, or I use fewer resources, or I use cheaper resources. Right? Those are the ways to make a profit. I mean, all other things being equal, that's about it. All right, so if I have exactly the same raw materials coming in, I put exactly the same amount of labor into it, and I get out more products at the end, then I can sell them for the same price everybody is selling their products for, and I make more money than other people, which means that I am making a profit. Or if I'm using the same raw materials and labor to produce better goods, I can sell them for a higher price than what other people are selling for, in which case I am making a profit. Or if I'm making the same number of things of the same quality, but I'm using fewer resources coming in, then I can sell the stuff for less than what other people are selling their stuff for. People will buy my products instead of somebody else's, and I make a profit. All right, so how do you do that? And Adam Smith says that the key to increasing wealth is the division of labor. So what you need is for somebody to come up with a new way of figuring out which tasks to assign to whom under what circumstances, right? Who's going to do what kind of a thing. So I think this is actually where the concept of, at least the phrase, division of labor came from. So division of labor in its simplest form is just taking a task and having more than one person perform the little bits and pieces of it, right? So his example is of someone who makes pens, as in needles. All right, so how do you make a pen? Well, he's right. I mean, this book came out in 1776, right? So how do you make a pen? Well, at one corner of your home office, you have a lump of iron in a big stove kind of a thing, and you constantly doing the bellows thing to keep it nice and hot, and you have to do that. and then you reach in with your tongs and you rip a little bit of the iron off of the thing, and then you take it over to the anvil and you get your hammer and you bang, 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 and then you stick a little hole in it. I don't know what all the steps are, but there's a lot of steps, right? And even that disregarded that somebody had to make the stove thing, somebody had to make had to pull the iron out of the ground. Somebody had to collect the coal or wood or whatever it is you're using to heat this stuff up. Somebody had to make some tongs, and that's not an easy thing to do, right? So there's an enormous number of steps that go into making a pen, right? It's just a needle thing, right? But Adam Smith says, well, but what if you were to break up that task, right? So instead of having one person pump the bellows for a while and then rip some iron off and then do this and do that, and then have to go back and pump the bellows for a while so that the iron's hot enough and then rip some iron off. What if you had somebody constantly pumping the bellows and somebody else constantly ripping some iron off and somebody else constantly hammering the iron and have each of the different steps performed by a different person, right? So what that's going to do is make it so that you get more overall stuff made with the same amount of labor time put in, right? So if I can make 10 pens in 10 hours, if we get 10 people performing this task, it's not going to take 10 people 1 hour to make 10 pens, right? It's going to take 10 people like 15 minutes to make 10 pens, and then we've got a whole bunch of time left over to make more pens or just, slack off. So here's how that's supposed to work. If you have different people performing the different tasks, then you've reduced transition time, right? So if we go back to the pen guy, it takes a while for the pen guy to put down the tools for one part of the process, move over to the other, part of his little shop, get the tools out for the next part of the process, use them, and then move on to the next step. Whereas if you can just do the same thing all day long, it might be boring, but you're not spending a lot of time shifting from one task to another. Moreover, since there's only one thing that you're doing, presumably you get really good at it. Right, so if I have to do all of the tasks in my little home office place, I might not be very good at any one of them in particular. I get the pens made, but maybe if I could just focus all of my time on forming the little head of the pen or something, maybe I would be better at it. And it also allows labor to be put into machines, right? So when you got a machine that is getting put into your production process, what you've done is decide, here's a task that a person used to do. But we've got a machine that can do it better, but here's what better means. All of the people who make the machine, they are indirectly doing what that one person had done. It's just that they're doing it more efficiently. Right? So there's some part in my production process where my pen gets flipped over or something like that, and we've got a professional pen flipper over, and it turns out that somebody can make a machine for flipping a pen over, and it takes them a very small amount of time to make the machine, and now I have the machine, and I don't need a person to be performing this task anymore. So what we've done is taken a few hours of the time of the mechanics who made the machine, and now we're using that to replace hundreds or thousands of man hours of whoever it was that was performing this now mechanized task. All right, and if you can think, the pen example I think is a little bit hard, but think about building a house, because those tasks I think seem intuitively more diverse to us. Try to imagine building a house completely on your own, right? So in order to do that, you have to make cement. Right, you have to be able to make the plumbing and the electricity and the floors and the carpets and the windows and the walls and the roof and all of it, right? And even if we go ahead and say you get to buy pre-made pipes and pre-made paint, right? Even if you've divided the task up that much, still. So you're there, you're trying to make this house completely on your own, and you are putting in the work of laying the foundation, and then you have to stop for a while so that you can put in a whole bunch of plumbing fixtures to go through the foundation. And so you stop all the foundation work, you put all of that stuff away, and then you go over to your van and you get out all of your plumbing stuff, and then you go back over to your house and you do a whole bunch of plumbing stuff, and then you have to put all the plumbing stuff back over in the van, and then you go back and start up the concrete thing again, and that is an enormous amount of time spent just moving from one task to another. Moreover, there's a lot of things that you have to be really good at to build a house. right? And it takes a while to get good at those things, right? So, I mean, we're talking about a year or multiple year apprenticeships for an awful lot of the tasks that are involved in building a house. I mean, some of the steps are not necessarily very hard, although you still need someone capable to direct you some. But I mean, carpentry takes a while, right? Electrical stuff is not, trivially easy. You can't just walk up and figure that stuff out. So if it takes like a year to get any good at laying foundations, then you have to spend a year learning how to lay foundations, and then you have to spend a year learning how to put in the plumbing, and then you have to spend a year learning how to do the electricity stuff. And by the time you've figured out all the things that you need, it's been 10 years and you haven't built any houses yet. Whereas if you got 10 different people and had each one of them study how to do one of the 10 tasks for 1 year, then 1 year in, you can start making houses. And moreover, it will take the 10 of you much less than 1/10 of the time to make a house than it would have taken you alone. If it would have taken you 10 months to make a house, it's not going to take 10 people a month to make a house. It's going to take an awful lot less time than that. So if we can divide up tasks, then we get an awful lot more stuff done in less labor time. It's not just that if you have 2 people doing something, it'll take half as long. If you have 2 people doing something, it'll take way less than half as long. And it kind of seems like this is almost like the definition of being human, right? A human being is not really capable of subsisting exclusively on her own, right? I mean, as a biological entity, you need a partner to fulfill your biological functions. But the tasks of living are just tremendously diverse, right? Food, clothing, shelter. I mean, even at the most basic level, you need to cut those tasks into different things, right? I mean, it's going to be really inefficient if, in order to secure food, I first have to figure out how to make a bow and arrow, and then I have to, et cetera, go through all the steps. Whereas if we could have somebody making arrows and somebody making bows and somebody hunting, we're going to collect way more food that way, right? So dividing up tasks among a lot of people seems like it's like essential to being human. So the idea that Smith has is, if I don't pay attention to people's pleasure, I can still benefit them by paying attention to something else that happens to be hooked up with pleasure, but that I can actually count, and that is money. So if I'm just trying to maximize my profit, I have to be giving people what they want. All right, and you can see why that would work on the output side, right? Why it is that if I make more stuff or better stuff, I'm going to get paid more. But what about on the input side? Right? Another great way of making a profit is by using fewer resources than were otherwise necessary, or by using worse resources than were otherwise necessary. And you can see immediately why using fewer resources would be cheaper, right? So if it takes my competitor a ton of steel to make a widget, and it takes me half a ton of steel to make a widget, then obviously I'm making better. I'm going to make some money that way. But what about worse stuff? Right, so people have been using, a ton of steel to make widgets, and I'm going to use a ton and a half of aluminum. Right? Is that like better or worse? I mean, how could you compare the value of steel to the value of aluminum? Well, again, that's where money comes in. Let's say that aluminum costs a lot less in my economy. Why is that? Because fewer people need to use it for something. So if I can avoid using steel, which apparently people really want because it's very expensive, and I'm using aluminum instead, which I'm doing because it is cheaper, it's cheaper because nobody else wanted to use it for anything. So what I've done is I've released a whole bunch of steel for use with other things. Right? So in not using the steel, I have managed to make it so that steel is cheaper for everybody, so things that you still have to have steel to make are cheaper for everybody. Right? So I've benefited all the people who buy stuff made out of steel, I've benefited the aluminum manufacturers, and I've benefited all of my customers, but I only did that because I was trying to benefit myself. And the only way that any of this is possible is because money allows us to translate all of the different preferences into anything else. Right? So the reason that I can say that aluminum is an inferior material to steel for a lot of other purposes is that it costs less in money. And the reason for that is that people who are buying consumer products, goods and services, are willing to pay less for things made out of aluminum. Right? So if I can manage to get them to pay just as much, then assuming that I'm doing honestly, I have to be saving everybody an awful lot of time and effort. All right, so how do you figure out how to do that? And the thing that you have to do is called entrepreneurial discovery. Entrepreneurial discovery is just figuring out a new way of dividing labor so as to make labor more efficient so that there is more wealth overall. So what you do is you come up with a machine or a different place that you're producing the stuff or a different place that you're selling the stuff or anything so that you are producing more or better stuff using fewer or worse resources given the same kind of labor, something like that. So an entrepreneurial discovery is the discovery of a way of increasing the sum total of wealth. Right? So what happens is that you take the ingenuity of an entrepreneurial discoverer, who's going to be either a literal entrepreneur or an engineer or both, and you turn that ingenuity into the necessity to do less labor for more or better stuff, and that makes everybody better off. It makes some people better off more directly than others, but ultimately it's supposed to make everybody better off. And you might have heard technological unemployment show up in there, right? So the idea of machines replacing human labor. And people are like, well, wait a minute, I mean, isn't this very bad for that laborer? It could be. It is worth bearing in mind that if the replacement of human labor with machine labor were typically bad for workers, everybody would be dead by now because we've been doing this for about a quarter of a millennium. So definitely, people who just lose their jobs to a machine are worse off in at least the short run. Where you have like an entire factory where people were doing something that is then replaced by a machine, a lot of people are probably made worse off by that. Right? And so, you can talk about steps that should be taken by governments or societies or whatever to sort of, soften those harms. But in the long run, people will find other jobs, right? Making other things or making the machines that will take somebody else's job away from them. And it is possible that we, right this minute, are having a very different version of this, right? So technological unemployment for the last quarter of a millennium has been a thing that sometimes harms some people, but usually benefits most people. But if you suddenly replaced like all human labor with computers, that would be kind of a different thing. That would be a little bit more upsetting. I will say that it is really weird that we have managed to find our way into a social situation where the idea of making it so that we have to do way less work to get the same amount of stuff seems like a dangerous idea, right? I mean, in a perfect world, we would have 100% technological unemployment because machines would do all of our work for us. And yet, we're like, oh no, the machines are taking people's jobs and this is somehow or other going to be bad. You got to wonder how we managed to make it bad that you could have machines doing human labor more efficiently. All right, so we've got the idea that entrepreneurial discovery of new forms of division of labor make it possible for us to increase the sum total of wealth. That is, we need less labor to produce more or better stuff. All right, but how do you implement an idea like that? So you have made an entrepreneurial discovery. How do you actually end up changing things? You've only got an idea. You've got the ingenuity part, but you need to actually have some labor to divide. All right, so here's what you need. You need someone you're going to need like equipment, you're going to need a factory maybe, you're going to need employees, right? But it's going to take a while before you can start selling this stuff that you have so cleverly thought up, right? So if it's going to take you, a year between starting your project and when the first thing rolls off the assembly line and you sell it, you're going to have to somehow or other convince people to work on your idea for a year before you can sell anything. And that is not going to work very well, right? Okay, so here's what you need. You need to be able to pay them for the year before you start actually getting anything. In order to do that, you're going to have somebody lend you some money, right? So again, the lending of the money part, the money is the trick that makes it possible for us to increase wealth and hopefully increase human well-being as a whole. Money is the common denominator between all of the things that can be produced and all of the things that can be consumed. All right, so you get someone to lend you some money, and then at the end of that time, you give them their money back plus some more money, and you have some money left over for yourself, and that's where your profit came from. All right, so this will bring me to the little Benjamin Franklin passages that I had you look at. So Benjamin Franklin says these two things, and each one of them on its own seems fine, and then you put them together and you realize there's something weird. So far as I know, Benjamin Franklin was the person who came up with the phrase, time is money. But certainly he said it in there. Benjamin Franklin, and I don't know how much you remember about him from like history classes, but I mean he was like Captain Efficiency. He was solid on the whole entrepreneurial ethic and Protestant work ethic, and work really hard and save, and everything will be better for you. There is a lot of truth to that, even if it might have been a little oversimplified. But so he said time is money, and what that means is anytime that you're not working to make money, you could have been. Right? So let's say that you've got an 8-hour-a-day job and it pays you, a certain amount of money. And if you wanted to, you could get another job and you could work that for 2 hours a night and you could get paid for that job too. But instead, you sit at home on the couch and watch TV for those 2 hours. That's 2 hours that you are not working. So you are spending the amount of money that you would have gotten paid for those 2 hours to sit on the couch. Right? Anytime you are not bringing money in, you are spending the money that you're not bringing in on whatever it is that you're doing instead, which is, of course, a reasonable thing to do an awful lot of the time. But he wants to say, oh my God, you're not working? You realize that you're spending the money that you could have been earning right now on whatever it is that you're doing, which most of us are like, yeah, but I will spend $15 an hour to sit on the couch, or whatever the possible wage would have been. And I know that's crazy high. All right, so time is money in this sense. And he also says that by way of investment, money can be multiplied, right? So I, invest my money with some people who've made entrepreneurial discoveries, and, after a while I have more money, which I then reinvest, which then gets increased again. So I'm not just adding money, I'm multiplying money. All right, but if you put those two things together, you end up with something that you might not have expected. So if time is money and money can be multiplied, time can be multiplied. What does that mean? I mean, you plainly cannot increase the number of hours in a day. And what Franklin is pointing out is that by way of investing in someone's entrepreneurial discovery so that they can divide labor more finely, you are indirectly making people's labor more efficient. So you're not literally changing the number of hours in a day, but you are changing the productive value of those hours. Right, so people in the industry that you have invested in, they're getting more done in less time. Right, so you have, as it were, multiplied the amount of time they're spending at work without actually changing the clock time. So you're not adding time to a work day, you're multiplying the productive value of the same number of hours. All right, and what all of this adds up to is utilitarianism has this issue with measuring pleasure. It just doesn't seem like it's a thing that it's possible to do. But if you make people offer you money for things, if you say, I will sell you this, how much would you buy it for? You get them to stick dollar units onto those pleasures, or onto their well-being, or onto their happiness, or onto their satisfaction. And that's an indirect way of kind of figuring out how pleased or well off or happy or something some good or service will make them. That's something that you can count. So if you're trying to maximize pleasure, but somebody is using money for pleasure, then if you just maximize the amount of money that they're spending, you are maximizing their pleasure. But trying to maximize the amount of money you're getting from someone is specifically pursuing a profit. Right? So if you are pursuing a profit, you are automatically doing the thing that will maximize the well-being of the people that you're selling things to. And because different people can all be offering money, whoever is offering the most money for something must want it more than other people. So in earning a profit, in entrepreneurial discovery of division of labor, in investing in people's entrepreneurial discoveries, you are increasing the sum total of wealth and the sum total of things that people will buy, and so presumably you're increasing the sum total of human well-being. So you would have thought that utilitarian instruction to try to maximize well-being would involve being nice to people. It certainly involves being nice to people in a lot of cases, but weirdly enough, Smith and Franklin are going to tell us, if you would just focus on your own profit most of the time, that's the most socially constructive thing you could do. All right, and let's kind of push back on that just slightly, because I gave like the really simple, pleasant version. There's a couple of issues. People can be irrational consumers, right? So I've been saying, oh, the more money they will give you, the more they must like the thing. Well, the more money they'll give you, the more they think they'll like it, or something like that. But people will sometimes buy things that they don't actually like. There's such a thing as buyer's remorse. You can use advertising to get people to make very irrational decisions. You can, use other kinds of pressure to get people to make irrational decisions. We're willing to spend way more on candy than we actually like a candy, and the reason that we do that is because they put the candy in the checkout aisle of the grocery store, where you're stuck with your screaming children who want candy. And so you're not actually paying for your child's candy satisfaction. You're paying for your own, no longer having to hear your kids scream at you. So there's ways of getting people to spend more on things than they, would on reflection. And, people are just sometimes ill-informed about what's actually to their benefit. If you're making a profit by selling things to people and they're not actually better off for them, then you're not really benefiting people. They think you are, otherwise they wouldn't be buying the stuff, but you're not really. And then, of course, there's also what's called negative externalities. An externality is a consequence of your actions that fall on other people, especially consequences of your economic actions. So there are positive externalities, which is where you do something that is focused on your own profit, but it happens to benefit people outside of all the economic stuff I've been talking about. And then there's negative externalities, where you're doing something for your own profit and it harms some people who didn't volunteer to be harmed, right? So let's say that I run a lawn company, right? So somebody hires me to come out and fix up their lawn. Their lawn is very pretty. All right, so I've benefited because I got paid. The person who hired me obviously benefited because, they wanted me to do this thing because they thought it was going to be better, so they're better off. They would rather have their lawn done this way than have the money they spent. But everybody else in the neighborhood also happens to benefit, right? I mean, the exchange was strictly between me and the homeowner, right? But a whole bunch of other people in the area, they've got a prettier lawn next door, so their lives are just ever so slightly better. So that's a positive externality. Right, but there's also negative externalities. A negative externality is when somebody else pays your costs without having agreed to do so. And you can get paid for producing products that you didn't do all the work for. And the classic example, the easy example, is just pollution, right? So I've got a company, we make some widgets. Part of the process of making those widgets involves some, chemical stuff. We end up with some chemical goop that is just really bad goop. All right, well, part of producing the widget is the disposal of the goop, right? I can dispose of the goop by putting it in proper barrels in a concrete blah, 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 whatever it is, right? Or I could dispose of it by putting it into people who then pay my production costs to their doctors, right? So if I dump my goop into a local lake and it gets into the drinking water and people get sick because of it, they're paying my production costs, right? I could have spent money on barrels and concrete and disposing the stuff correctly, or I could get somebody else to spend money on their own doctors because I store my toxic waste in people, right? That is a negative externality, and it is certainly possible for you to get a large profit by selling stuff that you didn't produce, right? That you managed to make somebody else kind of do a lot of the production work for you. So that certainly is a way in which it's possible to get a profit without actually making the world a better place. I mean, you might be better off, your customers might be better off, but somebody else is way worse off, right? So overall, you've made the world a worse place. All right. And there is one other kind of issue with the idea that you can maximize well-being by pursuing profit, which is this. The idea is that we can't directly measure pleasure, but you can indirectly measure it if you make people put dollar signs on the things that will bring them well-being. And if everybody had the same amount of money, that would work great. Right, so you can tell that I like bacon more than somebody else likes ice cream because I'm willing to spend more on bacon than they're willing to spend on ice cream. Right? So if you're the person who's trying to increase overall well-being, you say, well, how can I make the most money? Selling bacon to Brian is the best way to make money. But in doing that, they give me bacon, which I obviously like more than somebody else likes ice cream because I'm willing to spend more on it. So they make their profit. I get the thing that I most want in the world, and you work your way down, and eventually the ice cream is a profitable thing for somebody else to make. So what we're doing is we're trying to use money as a common measure of pleasures. The trouble happens when people have different amounts of money, right? So if I have $100 and you have $100 and I need an open heart surgery and you need ice cream, I will spend $100 on open heart surgery and you will spend $2 on ice cream. And that means the most profitable thing for someone to make is open heart surgery, which seems reasonable. On the other hand, let's say that I have $100 and I need open heart surgery, but you have $1 billion and you have a hankering for a yacht. All right, well, I can put all of my $100 down for my open heart surgery, but you can put down $500 million for your yacht and you won't even notice the difference. Which means that a profit-minded person is going to go into the yacht-making business, not the open heart surgery-making business, which means that you're going to get your yacht, but I'm going to die. So if we're trying to measure all pleasures in one common unit, that works a lot better if everybody is spending the same amount of money. So there is an issue there with an inequality of currency. So mostly this has been kind of a pro-free market sermon, but there is an issue about inequality of wealth when it comes to trying to maximize well-being by way of maximizing your profit.